is expected to announce this hour approval to send M1 Abrams tanks to Ukraine, U.S. officials said Tuesday. This as international reluctance to send tanks to the battlefront against the Russians begins to erode. While the decision to send more than 30 tanks is forthcoming, it could take months for the tanks to be delivered. And after weeks of hesitation, Chancellor Olaf Scholz announced his government will approve supplying German-made battle tanks to Ukraine, clearing the way for Europe to do so as well. Here's VOA's Tommy McNeil.
The long-awaited decision came after U.S. officials said a preliminary agreement had been struck for the United States to send M1 Abrams tanks to help Kyiv push back Russian forces entrenched in the east, almost a year since the start of the war. Scholz had insisted that any move to provide Ukraine with powerful Leopard 2 tanks would need to be closely coordinated with Germany's allies, chiefly the United States. By getting Washington to commit some of its own tanks, Berlin hopes to spread the risk of any backlash from Russia. Tommy McNeil, VOA News, Washington.
As Russia has struggled to hold territory in Ukraine, the White House says the Kremlin is increasingly relying on the Wagner Group to recruit prisoners for war efforts. VOA's Igor Tikhoninyanka has our story.
John Kirby is the U.S. National Security Council spokesperson.
The casualty rates for convicts is extraordinarily high. As a matter of fact, what we think is that 90% of their casualties are convicts.
Moscow disputes foreign tallies of war dead, but it's clear Russia's convicts are dying at high rates. Ukrainian officials estimate that some 77% of the 38,000 Russian prisoners brought to fight in Ukraine have been killed, wounded, or captured or have gone missing. Igor Tikhoninyanka, VOA News, New York.
This is VOA News. As Californians deal with two mass shootings just days apart, U.S. President Joe Biden is supporting gun control measures introduced by a senator in the U.S. state of California to renew the 1994 assault weapons ban. White House Bureau Chief Patsy Widakuswara reports the legal landscape for more gun control in the U.S. looks bleak.
2 days after a gunman killed at least 11 people in Monterey Park as the city's Asian American community was celebrating Lunar New Year, shootings in two locations at Half Moon Bay, also in the state of California. At least 7 people died. California Governor Gavin Newsom.
We got serious about these things and led the nation on assault weapons bans, large capacity magazine clips, background checks on ammunition, waiting periods, and red flag laws, saving lives. But the federal government hasn't done it.
California is one of 10 states that prohibit the sale or possession of military-style assault weapons. Patsy Widakuswara, VOA News, Washington.
Documents marked classified were found in former Vice President Mike Pence's Indiana home last week, the latest in a string of recoveries of confidential information from the homes of current and former top U.S. officials. AP correspondent Julie Walker has more.
The documents with classified markings make up about 4 boxes, according to his lawyer, and were inadvertently transported to the former vice president's personal home at the end of the last administration. His lawyer says that Mike Pence had been unaware of the existence of sensitive or classified documents at his personal residence until a search last week, and stands ready and willing to cooperate fully with the National Archives and any appropriate inquiry. The revelation comes as the DOJ was already investigating the discovery of classified documents in President Biden's home in Delaware and his former Washington office, as well as former President Trump's Florida estate. I'm Julie Walker.
At least 8 African migrants died and 92 others were rescued after their boat capsized on Tuesday as they tried to cross the Mediterranean to Italy, the Libyan Red Cross told Reuters. Eyewitnesses on the boat said it was overcrowded when it sank. The Libyan Red Crescent members have been handling the ongoing search and rescue operations. Tuesday was another day of fury in Peru's capital as thousands of protesters took to downtown Lima and were almost immediately met with volleys of tear gas amid clashes with security forces that often blocked their passage. More than 50 people have died in ongoing street protests in the weeks since Peru's elected leader was jailed, mostly demonstrators at the hands of police officers. And recapping our top story, the Biden administration is announcing at this moment approval to send M1 Abrams tanks to Ukraine. By remote, Diane Roberts, VOA News.
This is VOA News. I'm Marissa Melton. Russia launched a fresh wave of missile strikes on Ukraine Thursday while heavy fighting continued unabated in the east. The new missile attacks came after President Volodymyr Zelensky called on Kyiv's Western allies to deliver long-range missiles and military aircraft to beef up Ukraine's air defenses. Also Thursday, the U.S. Treasury took further action on Russia over the war in Ukraine by sanctioning 8 people, 16 entities, and 4 aircraft. More from VOA's Steve Miller.
The Treasury Department also designated Russia's Wagner Group as a significant transnational criminal organization. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen said in a statement, quote, "Today's expanded sanctions on Wagner, as well as new sanctions on their associates and other companies enabling the Russian military complex, will further impede Putin's ability to arm and equip his war machine." Thursday's actions, concurrent with additional sanctions by the Department of State, targets the infrastructure that supports battlefield operations in Ukraine, including producers of Russia's weapons and those administering Russian-occupied areas of Ukraine. Steve Miller, VOA News.
The U.S. Department of Commerce said Thursday the U.S. economy cooled only slightly at the end of last year, even as forecasters are suggesting a recession is possible later this year. Later in the day, President Biden used a speech in Virginia to promote his record on the economy and said the country must pay what it owes.
The United States of America, we pay our debts. It took 200 years to accumulate that debt.
He also accused Republicans of wanting to raise gas prices and cut taxes for billionaires. He said he would veto any such legislation that came across his desk. From Washington, this is VOA News. Sources tell the AP the National Archives has asked former presidents and vice presidents to recheck their personal records for any classified documents. AP's Ed Donahue has more.
The letter was sent to representatives of former presidents and vice presidents extending back to Ronald Reagan to ensure compliance with the Presidential Records Act. It comes after classified documents were found connected to former President Donald Trump and more recently President Biden and former Vice President Mike Pence.
We have had for quite a number of years any number of mishandling investigations.
FBI Director Chris Wray didn't talk specifics, but said
that is unfortunately a regular part of our counterintelligence divisions and counterintelligence programs work. And people need to be conscious of the rules regarding classified information and appropriate handling of it.
Special counsels are looking into the handling of the Trump and Biden documents. Ed Donahue, Washington.
Musician Sir the Baptist's collaboration with the Tennessee State University Marching Band has gotten the attention of the Grammy Awards. AP Entertainment correspondent Margie Zaraletta has more.
For the first time, a band for a historically black college or university has been nominated for the Best Roots Gospel Album Grammy. It's a project called The Urban Hymnal, created by producer Sir the Baptist and TSU assistant band director Larry Jenkins. They wanted to tell the story of black history, but they did not think the Grammys would consider the record. They say, imagine what happened when it got nominated.
The kids went wild. I mean, running through the hall and all.
Running out of class. Literally. Leaving class in real time, screaming in the hall.
The Grammys will be awarded February 5th. I'm Archie Zaraletta.
The U.S. Justice Department announced Thursday it's brought down an international ransomware network that extorted more than $100 million from hundreds of victims around the world. The department said the development follows months of infiltration by the FBI. The Justice Department said the group, known as Hive, targeted more than 1,500 victims in at least 80 countries, including hospitals, school districts, and financial firms. The FBI took down the Hive network's servers on Wednesday with help from German and Dutch law enforcement. The Palestinian Authority said it was ending its security coordination with Israel in the occupied West Bank after a deadly Israeli military raid in a flashpoint city on Thursday. This according to a spokesperson for Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas. The security coordination with Israel has been widely credited with helping to keep order in the West Bank and preventing attacks against Israel. Palestinian officials said earlier Israeli commandos killed 7 gunmen and 2 civilians in a raid on the city of Jenin. I'm Marissa Melton, VOA News.
This is VOA News. I'm Joe Ramsey. New Russian shelling has killed at least 10 Ukrainian civilians and wounded 20 others in a day, according to the office of Ukraine's president. A day earlier, missiles and self-propelled drones that Russian forces fired had hit deeper into Ukrainian territory, killing at least 11 people. The bombardments followed announcements by the United States and Germany of plans to ship powerful tanks to help Ukraine defend itself. Auschwitz-Birkenau survivors and other mourners have commemorated the 78th anniversary of the liberation of the Nazi German death camp in the final months of World War II. Speaking through an interpreter, a 72-year-old Israeli wipes away tears, saying the Nazi death camp at Auschwitz-Birkenau with its barbed wire and the ruins of gas chambers stirs feelings of horror.
It's very difficult to be here. I was in Bergen-Belsen. I saw there and now here. And you can't believe it.
A global chemical weapons watchdog has blamed Syria's Air Force for a deadly chlorine attack, AP correspondent Charles de Ledesma reports.
A probe by the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons has established there are reasonable grounds to believe Syria's Air Force had dropped 2 cylinders containing chlorine gas on the Syrian city of Douma in April 2018, killing 43 people. The watchdog's report offers the latest confirmation. The regime of Syrian President Bashar Assad used chemical weapons during his country's grinding civil war. Syria had joined the OPCW in 2013 under pressure from the international community after being blamed for another deadly chemical weapon attack. I'm Charles de Ledesma.
This is VOA News. Israeli jets struck overnight Gaza on Friday in retaliation for 2 rockets fired by Palestinian militants, further escalating tensions after one of the worst days of violence in the occupied West Bank in years. Reuters correspondent Lucy has more.
Israel raided a refugee camp in Jenin on Thursday, killing at least 9 Palestinians, gunmen and at least 2 civilians, including an elderly woman. It was the highest death toll on a single day in the West Bank for years. Another man died in a separate incident in Al-Ram outside Jerusalem, bringing the Palestinian death toll so far this year to at least 30, just days before U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is due to visit Israel and the West Bank.
Reuters correspondent Lucy Fielder. 20 people were killed and 7 injured, 2 critically, when their bus collided at high speed with a broken-down truck in central Chad, the Transport Ministry said on Friday. The accident occurred shortly before midnight Thursday on a desert road, it said in a statement. The coach had 31 people on board, and early investigations point to excessive speed and driver carelessness or fatigue, it said. Hong Kong will soon consider CBD oil a dangerous drug, AP correspondent Donna Warder reports.
Supporters of the marijuana-derived CBD say it can treat a range of ailments, including anxiety, and users don't get high. But starting February 1st, CBD oil will be illegal in Hong Kong, and officials like Chan Kai-ho of Hong Kong's Customs Airport Command say there will be harsh penalties for possession, including up to life in prison and hundreds of thousands of dollars in fines. Hong Kong announced the ban last year, and officials say businesses that have sold products that contain CBD have had months to get rid of those products. I'm Donna Warder.
The Philippine Justice Secretary said Friday in the investigation violating the country's sovereignty by the International Criminal Court into the widespread killings of suspects during an anti-drug crackdown under former President Rodrigo Duterte would be, quote, totally unacceptable. He spoke in reaction to the decision on Thursday by judges in the Hague-based course allowing a prosecutor to resume an investigation. Authorities in the southern U.S. state of Tennessee are about to release a police video depicting officers beating a black man who later died. Tyree Nichols' death prompted murder charges Thursday against the officers, an outrage at the country's latest instance of police brutality. Nichols died 3 days after a confrontation with the officers during a traffic stop on January 7th. I'm Joe Ramsey, VOA News.
strike on a city in the eastern region of Donetsk killed at least 3 people Saturday as Ukrainian forces engaged Russian troops in ferocious battles in several hotspots in the east, where Moscow has been pressing its offensive with increased urgency and amid Western pledges of modern tank deliveries for Kyiv. That's what Radio Free Europe is reporting. And 3 people were killed and at least 2 others were injured as Russian forces struck a residential neighborhood in the eastern Ukrainian city of Kostianivka, the regional governor said on Saturday. That's according to Reuters. Meantime, an expanding U.S. military helpline aimed at providing repair advice to Ukrainian forces in the heat of battle has turned to virtual chat rooms. AP correspondent Sarah Nafa reports.
Using phones and tablets to communicate in encrypted chat lines, a rapidly growing group of U.S. and allied troops and contractors are providing real-time maintenance advice to Ukrainian troops on the battlefield. As allies send more and increasingly complex high-tech weapons to Ukraine, demands for these services are spiking, particularly as no U.S. or other NATO nations will send troops into the country to provide hands-on assistance, amid worries about being drawn into direct conflict with Russia. Fixing a howitzer, repair teams say, has been a frequent request from Ukrainian troops on the front lines. Just a few months ago, there were a bit more than 50 members of these remote maintenance teams. That will surge to 150 in the coming weeks, and the number of encrypted chat lines has more than tripled, from about 11 last fall to 38 now. I'm Sarah Nafa.
European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen said ahead of an EU-Ukraine summit next week that Ukraine had unconditional support from the bloc. For more stories, visit voanews.com. This is VOA News. Former U.S. President Donald Trump is set to kick off his 2024 White House campaign today with visits to 2 of the earliest voting states. AP correspondent Jackie Quinn reports.
New Hampshire and South Carolina are in focus for former President Trump, who's hoping the events will offer a show of support for his bid to return to the White House. He's introducing his state leadership teams to show his campaign is ready to go. A spokesperson in New Hampshire termed it, "The gun is fired," and the campaign season has started. Trump is the only declared Republican for the 2024 race, although it's expected former Vice President Mike Pence, former UN Ambassador Nikki Haley, and Florida Governor Ron DeSantis may enter the contest. I'm Jackie Quinn.
From the U.S. city of Memphis, Tennessee, police video showing 5 police officers beating a black man during a traffic stop earlier this month has been made public. AP correspondent Ben Thomas reports.
You might get sprayed again.
5 officers beating and pepper spraying Tyree Nichols during a traffic stop earlier this month. He died 3 days later. Memphis Police Chief Sarah C.J. Davis.
The lack of supervision in this incident was a major problem.
She says there's no footage of what led to Nichols being stopped in the first place.
We can't substantiate the reason for the stop.
Adding,
in the video, the initial stop shows the officers already ramped up at about a 10.
I'm Ben Thomas.
A Palestinian gunman has opened fire in East Jerusalem, wounding 2 people less than a day after a fatal shooting outside a synagogue. AP correspondent Sarah Nafa reports.
A Palestinian gunman opened fire in East Jerusalem on Saturday, wounding 2 people, less than a day after another assailant killed 7 outside a synagogue in the deadliest attack in the city since 2008. According to paramedics, both were fully conscious and in moderate to serious condition in the hospital. The attacker was shot and wounded by police. The attack, coming just a day before U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken was set to arrive in the region, has raised the possibility of even greater conflict in what is already one of the bloodiest months in Israel and the occupied West Bank in several years. I'm Sarah Nafa.
Dozens of indigenous children suffering from malnutrition and acute diseases have been hospitalized in northern Brazil. The health secretary of Boa Vista, the capital of Roraima state, said that 59 indigenous children were currently at the only pediatric hospital in the state. Reporting via remote, I'm Laurel Bowman for VOA News.